Hey, good morning, friends. Today, my friends, is Tuesday, September the 23rd, 2025, and the time now is 7:40 a.m. So, friends, I want to talk about Malawi. I want to talk about the southern or southeast African country of Malawi, which is one of the poorest countries in Africa and in the world. I want to talk specifically about the refugee camp in Malawi and the plight, the current situation of refugees, and what some refugees, especially women, are subjected to. Now, friends, this video is a geopolitical video because it does have to do with refugee, basically refugees from other parts of Africa, East Africa, the DRC Congo, and so on, Kenya, Tanzania, and so on, into Malawi. And also, it does have some domestic implication as well. However, as I said earlier a couple of seconds ago, this video is a geopolitical video. Now, friends, just like many African countries, Malawi has been subjected to the whole situation of refugee intake. We do have this thing going on throughout Africa. I remember during the Liberian civil wars, countries in West Africa hosted Liberian refugees. We are talking in this case Sierra Leone, Guinea, Ivory Coast, Ghana, all these countries talking Liberian citizens, Liberian refugees. Also, friends, during the Sierra Leonean Civil War, Sierra Leonean citizens or refugees went to Guinea, Ivory Coast, Liberia, and so on. This also was the case for Nigeria when they had the Biafran War, the situation in Sudan, South Sudan, the situation in Darfur, the situation in Congo, the DRC Congo, Central African Republic. So, friends, basically, every time there was a civil war in Africa, neighboring countries basically will accept refugees from the warring country, the civil war inflicted country. And this is the case for Malawi. So, Malawi has been accepting refugees from parts of Africa for a while now. Now, we all know in recent times when Donald Trump came to office, one thing that he did, which as of now I do believe it was a strategy to attack Africa. Donald Trump immediately cut USAID. He cut or restricted or suspended USAID to countries all over the world and also to African countries. And I believe the reason for this is so that Donald Trump can then require these countries to do what Donald Trump wants them to do. So basically, I'm going to take the aid, the help that I'm giving you, because I'm engaging in foolishness, and you have to accept my foolishness. And we know as of now, many countries in Africa have agreed to accept US deportees. So basically, immigrants, illegal immigrants, or criminals, as the United States President Donald Trump and the US government has said, which the United States or who the United States is deporting to a third country will be going to these African countries. Countries such as Uganda and Rwanda are countries that are said to have accepted the US bid to send deportees to these countries. As much as these leaders and countries will brag that they are doing good, I do believe that these countries and leaders are actually asking for their own problems. You have citizens in these countries need help, yet these countries are taking refugees or they are taking deportees, criminals, as the United States government and presidents have said, from the United States. And also as a result, many countries and people in Africa and Africans around the world are asking, why are you taking the so-called criminals that the United States doesn't want to Africa? Why are you taking American deportees while there are Africans all over the continent who are stuck in refugee camps? Also, with these countries being in dire situation, financial situation, bringing in refugees will mean problem for these countries. I do believe, friends, the prospect of revolution in these African countries, these countries that are accepting US deportees, and also these countries that are basically taking nonsense from the West or the entire Africa in general. There will be a revolution in the near or far future, I believe. And what Donald Trump is doing is basically expediting the prospect of revolution in Africa. Now, friends, I apologize for deviating, but back to Malawi. Malawi has a refugee camp which was built for about 10,000 or so people. Now, it is said that about 58 to 60,000 people live in the refugee camp. Now, when Donald Trump came to office, he cut USAID or suspended USAID. As a result, institutions, countries, refugee camps, organizations all over the world are starved of cash or of the financial resources that they would have needed to run their organizations or run themselves, basically fund their operation. And this is the case for the refugee camp in Malawi. As a result of Donald Trump's cut or suspension of USAID to the world and to Malawi, and also as a result of donors' cut that basically have been occurring all over the world. In this case, friends, we are talking about the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, or in general, the European Union, EU. Basically, they've been suspending or cutting resources, cutting aid to countries, organizations, institutions all over the world. And as a result of these cuts or suspension of aid, countries such as Malawi and its refugee program have been starving of cash. And this basically have disenabled the refugee camp in Malawi to basically service the people, take care of the people. As a result, it is said that the amount of financial funding that refugees would have received for their monthly allowance have been cut to at least 50% or more. And as a result, people are not able to survive easily. In Malawi, in the refugee camp, and we are talking in this case for a refugee camp that was built for about 10,000 people, now house about 58,000 people or more. It is basically a serious situation where, as a result of the funding cut and other measures, other situations, refugees are turning to illegals or other means of survival. It is said that there has been human trafficking and other situations. Now, as for women, many of the women are turning to the sex industry, basically becoming prostitute, if I should put it in that manner. And many of these sex workers are being attacked, whether we are talking in this case by their customers or by the police and so on and so on. There has been riots or protests in the refugee camps and so on. Now for Malawi, Malawi itself is said to have had a law, or that Malawi has a law in place that prevents refugees from working outside of the camp, basically working beyond the walls of the refugee camps. And it is also said that as of now, Malawi is considering changing that law so that refugees can be able to work throughout the countries in various places. But my question is, what is Malawi doing? And what is Africa, the rest of Africa? I'm talking in this case, all the African countries coming together, or more specifically, the black countries known as Sub-Saharan Africa. What are they doing to come together to accept the fact that the refugee situation is a situation for everyone, so that they can be able to service, to provide the necessities for refugees across border, so that they can basically incorporate or welcome refugees within their individual borders. Instead of bringing in deportees from the United States, who the US is now saying are nothing but criminals, why don't you bring in Africans from other countries who need help? Why don't you expand trade across border? African countries are focusing so much on trade, international external trade with the rest of the world rather than among themselves. African countries have bought the notion that in order for them to develop, they need excess, outside funding to come in. Of course, that can be the case, but I do believe governments can become radical and socialist enough to say, okay, we are going to use the resources we have, we are going to sell the resources and buy the necessary brain power or the information or the resources or whatever we need from outside institutions and countries and organizations, bring it in and sustain and basically develop ourselves and our people. Once again, this is my question, and I hope, my friends, you can help me answer these questions or this question. But for Malawi, I do applaud Malawi and countries in Africa and even countries around the world that have accept refugees from neighboring countries to help them. For a country such as Malawi, being one of the poorest in Africa and one of the poorest in the world, that is a big responsibility, bringing in refugees, in addition to the fact that neighboring countries, you do have people who come and live there, who travel across borders. Being able to welcome and service them, it's a big deal for a country such as Malawi. It is a big sacrifice. But I do believe that perhaps Malawi might want to reach out to other African countries. They might want to come together and see how they can put their resources together, organize themselves to be able to alleviate the tension in these countries in Africa, and also alleviate and perhaps solve their situations in terms of financial, economics, refugees, civil wars, unrest, academics, economics, development, infrastructure, and so on and so on and so on. However, friends, for the refugees in Malawi, in the refugee camp, and also it is the case for other refugee camps in Africa and around the world. The refugees in Malawi, many are very much disappointed that they've been in the camp for decades, for years. Some of them, they've been in these camp, or some of them, they've been in the camp in Malawi, waiting to be allowed to be able to travel to a third country, whether we are talking about the United States, Europe, Australia, Canada, and so on and so on and so on. And they have been met with nothing but disappointment, basically denial. And that create health issues. It create more anxiety and so on. Many do have children, many do have health condition, and they are stuck in the refugee camp in Malawi and even refugee camps elsewhere. And many cannot go back home, whether due to fear that they may be attacked when they go back home, or that their family members may have died, or there is no reason to go home. Sometimes you've lived out of your country for so long. Going back home, you are seen or you see yourself as a failure. So that is an anxiety that many refugees around the world, or in this case in Malawi, face. Now, I'm a refugee. I was born in Liberia. I know what it means to be a refugee on the one hand. Once again, friends, I know what it means on the one hand to be a refugee. Of course, I do not have the complete refugee experience or experiences that many refugees who live in camps, who travel across and beyond and through borders have lived. Many refugees who have to dodge gunshots and bullets, okay, flying to and fro, stray bullets and so on. I may not have lived, okay, or experienced to that extent or to that extreme many of the experiences that other refugees have had. But I know what it means to be away from your family. I know what it means to not be at home. I know what it means to be in a place where you have to create for yourself or for your family a new identity and only hope for the best. I know what it means to be experiencing continuously, okay, tremendously, totally different form of disappointment and anxiety. But for Malawi, once again, I want to thank Malawi and applaud them for helping people in Southern Africa and in Africa. However, friends, for Malawi, I want to thank and applaud Malawi for accepting and servicing refugees from the DRC Congo, Uganda, or Tanzania, Kenya, or different African countries. It is a big deal to accept such responsibility. And as of now, at a time where the United States is attacking every country financially, with Donald Trump basically suspending or cutting USAID, which I think is nothing but a racist move, a criminal move, to basically attack countries out there and forcing them to engage in America's foolishness, basically in the foolishness that Donald Trump is doing around the world. And for the refugees in Malawi, I understand what they are going through. Now, friends, if you're watching my program for the first time, if you're new to my videos or to this channel, The Echoing Voice, I want you to know that every international institution, every prominent international institution, such as the African Union, the European Union, CARICOM, the United Nations, and so on and so on and so on, does have at least one playlist on this channel. However, every country has at least two playlists on this channel. One is named the country's name and the other domestic the country's name. And this, my friends, is how it is set up. The country's name playlist does feature videos, talks, programs, or ideas that focus specifically on the country's geopolitical position, its interaction with countries and institutions in its region and around the world. In this case, we are talking about Malawi. Therefore, we are talking about Malawi allowing refugees into its territory. Also, friends, Malawi's interaction with countries, regions, institutions, and organizations in Africa and around the world. However, friends, for the Domestic the Countries playlist, it features videos, talks, ideas, programs about the country's domestic situation. Whether we are talking about transportation, infrastructure, economics, academics, stability, agriculture, food program, and so on and so on and so on. Therefore, for Malawi, Domestic Malawi's playlist, it is going to feature, or it features, videos, talks, programs, or ideas about the domestic situation in Malawi, education, academics, infrastructure, development, and so on and so on and so on. Now, friends, please tell me what you think, and I really want to know what you think. But friends, I am going to end here. I want to thank you for being a member of the Echoing Voice community, my friends. But most especially and most importantly, or most important, my friends, I want to thank you a lot for watching the Echoing Voice. Peace, my friends. Peace.